Okay, welcome, Josh. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are the owner of INSTRUQ, and can you tell us a little bit about what you do there?
Yeah, so I started INSTRUQ in 2013. I worked in the tech industry most of my life, and the company I worked for at the time, we were bought by Rakuten, which is a Japanese tech firm. They're like the biggest web hosting. They're the biggest, like they were like the Amazon of Japan. And so they bought us. I worked for buy.com. It was an online retailer at the time. And I was given 6 months layoff notice. So they had like sent out layoff notices, and I was on the list, and I was actually working at home the day that the notices went out. And I called my supervisor. I was like, "Hey, is this me on this list?" And he said, "Yeah, I think it is." And I said, "Okay." And I go, but they said, "But you have to come in on Monday because we need you to finish this project that you're working on." So I had 6 months to figure out what I was going to do. And I'd been there like 14 years. So I left with a pretty good severance, and I just took my entire severance package and invested it into this company that I call INSTRUQ. I also have, so basically what I did was I have 28 years in law enforcement. I worked for the Orange County Sheriff's Department as a reserve. And so, a big part of law enforcement obviously is training. And I enjoy training quite a bit. And I had developed a relationship with a federal task force out of Los Angeles that wanted to expand their training footprint rather than, they basically, they service 4 counties. They service Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, and LA. But as you know, the traffic is crazy, right? So people in Palm Desert or Palm Springs, they didn't want to drive to Los Angeles to sit in a 4-hour class or an 8-hour class. It was kind of counterproductive for them. So they wanted to figure out a way to put their training online. And I was actually going up there for 8 weeks for a narcotics course. And during the 8 weeks, I got to know the staff at this task force pretty well. And I was kind of telling them like, well, this is what you have to do. You have to do this and you have to do that. And and they, of course, didn't have any idea what I was talking about, and they didn't have the funding to do it. And so by the end of the 8 weeks, they just said, why don't you just start a company and we'll partner with you? And I said, okay, that's kind of cool. So that was my out of my job with buy.com. And so we started. It's funny because I remember having a meeting with the board up there, and my partner and I kind of sat there and told him what our plan was. And then when we left, I remember sitting in the parking lot with him, and I thought, man, I guess we have to really figure out how to do this now. And he kind of laughed, and he's all, yeah, I guess we do, right? Because it was a green light. I mean, I told him the concept of what we wanted to do, and then it took us about, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 months to kind of figure out how to get it rolling. We put together a proprietary website. We applied for a startup account with Microsoft Azure, so we got a lot of free services from them. So that was a real helpful thing. And at that time, there was equipment that was kind of coming onto the scene that was really affordable, that you didn't have to spend $100,000 on live streaming equipment. You could spend $10,000 to $15,000. So that barrier, that they brought that barrier down to a point, and it was just the right timing too. So New Tech, which is some of the equipment we were using at the time, they had released some product that was very affordable for us to get into this. And with the support of the task force, I mean, we figured it out. We started to build a customer base, and here we are, 11 years later almost. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Did you have to go through any kind of bidding for government contracts, or was it just kind of already?
Yeah, no, there wasn't really a bid because we weren't offering. The only service we were offering the task force which is actually, it's called HIDA. It's the High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. They're under the Office of National Drug Control Policy. And so what they basically do is they get funding to help combat like major narcotics. Like in law enforcement, you know, the street level guy might go after, and of course the drug industry has, or the drug enforcement business, I guess if you want to call it that, has changed a lot over the last few years. So, but the street level guy, that's the average cop on the street, you know, he goes after grams and ounces, and you would say these task force level guys go after pounds and kilos. So they do a lot of high level stuff. And this task force is funded under ONDCP. And what they basically did was supplied all the support necessary for the task force, which is made up of local law enforcement agencies, to do that at that level. So we were one of their missions is to provide training, and so all I was doing was helping them spread their training message to a wider audience. So I wasn't really selling them anything, so there was no real bid. I didn't have to do like any kind of bidding, thankfully. They had to get their okay, obviously, from their higher ups, and then I kind of started working with. There's 32 to maybe 36 HIDAs now throughout the U.S. So I worked with quite a few of those to get the training out to their initiative members and whatnot. So and you know, I basically what we do is I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call.
That's it.
Basically what we do is we took their training room and turned it into a live streaming training, like a dedicated studio, right? Okay. So the room that people would drive to train in, we created a stage. We put in proper lighting. We mounted cameras throughout the room. We created like a little control area in the back where we could do our live streaming from. And so we can just walk in at any time and start live streaming any class that we need to. And then I work with instructors throughout the U.S. and we create a class that is of interest to law enforcement, and then we advertise that as a live stream. So then you have the option, you can come to the class in person if you're local. You can watch it on through our platform, which is a vetted law enforcement only website, and then that creates an on-demand class that we then sell if you didn't know that it was available for live streaming. So it's been a pretty good. Been pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, and what got you focused on creating these, I guess, vehicles for law enforcement training rather than any other?
Well, I knew the space for one thing. I was familiar with the business because, I mean, I keep referring to it as a business, but I'd been in law enforcement for so long and attended, I don't know how many thousands of hours of training. You know, a lot of people, when I tell them I train law enforcement, they think like I train them to shoot, you know, or do high speed, you know, tactical type stuff. And really like 80% of the training that we go through is more theoretical, right? So it's more lecture based. It's more, you know, hey, these are the new case laws that you need to be aware of. Or, I mean, in California, they're passing so many crazy laws, you know, to handcuff us, no pun intended. But I mean, just the decriminalization of so many things, and you know, you have to really be aware of what's happening out there so that you're not violating people's rights or getting yourself into any kind of hot water. So I mean, it really is. It's on the officer. So there's like basic training you have to do to meet state level requirements. But the stuff I offer is all of that like extra advanced type stuff, right? So we offer homicide school, we offer detective school. So if you were at the patrol level and wanted to move into a special assignment, you could take a class, you know, which is like 32 hours, right? So we give you like the very basics of what to expect, ethics, investigative techniques, technology, how to work with analysts, all that kind of stuff, so that when you put in your request to go to a detective position, hey, at least I've done some of my homework, right? Like at least I've partaked in some training, that might put me above the next guy, right? If we have the same qualifications, same time on or whatnot. And we've gotten tremendous feedback, right? So essentially I partner with instructors that already teach us for major law enforcement agencies throughout the US. So it's the stuff that guys are already getting. We're just putting it online, making it available to people who either aren't able to get to that agency for the training, or there's 50% of the agencies in the US are less than 10 members, like 10 sworn members. They don't have access to large urban areas to get good quality training. So we just decided, hey, let's try and fill that hole.
Okay, so you can take any position, any level within a unit, and the person can opt to take the training. It's not like they have to be told by their boss they're allowed to, or...
Yeah, so originally the idea was to just go after an officer's discretionary income, that wanted to train. People that want to train, in California, we're pretty lucky. If you go to the training calendars that are out there that are hosted by various entities, you could train every day. There's always a class going on somewhere between San Diego and Los Angeles, and you could get a lot of training that way. But who has the time to do that, right? You have to either take time off, do it on your off time, and you're driving all over the place. So there is a huge market for people who want the information in our state, definitely. But I do get agencies that purchase training for their guys because they like the content. They like the messages being delivered. So they'll say, hey, I want to put my 10 sergeants through this use of force training so that they know what's going on or whatnot. So I have a lot of agencies that reach out and buy training in bulk, I guess you could say. And the other thing that's kind of cool too is there's a lot of agencies out there that they give a pay incentive to their guys if they go above and beyond their standard training requirements. So I think I get, think there's a couple agencies in California and a couple on the East Coast. And I think if they do 40 hours of training in a year, they get a 3% pay incentive, which is pretty significant, So, and then a lot of those guys get paid for the day they're doing the training too. So it's incentivized, to do it. So that's worked out pretty well for us as well. So we've gotten good feedback on that as well.
Okay. Did you, at some point you were considering offering a membership? Did you ever decide that was gonna make sense, or? COVID was a really interesting time for us. We gained a lot of business because you couldn't go train in person. But we also kind of lost some of our instructor base because they said, I've had enough of law enforcement, I'm leaving. Wow.
And they just retired, right? Like they retired, they moved out of state to a cheaper state where retirement was more beneficial for them. And then I had a lot of instructors, because Zoom became the thing, right? Zoom was just everywhere. Everybody was using Zoom. And so a lot of instructors were like, well, why do I need to go on INSTRUQ when I can just go on Zoom? You know what I mean? And I can go direct to the, which is fine. But I don't know if you've ever, it's painful sitting through a 20-minute Zoom meeting. Can you imagine sitting through an 8-hour Zoom training? Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And this is what you get, right? Your Zoom training is just a head and shoulders, a talking head on a pair of shoulders.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all right, you do this, do that. This is what are we making of it? And I sat through a few of them and I was just like, oh, kill me already, It's terrible. And so that that was unfortunately a lot of people's like first introduction to online training. And so when they did it, they were like, ooh, this is terrible. I don't want to do this anymore, But what's unique about us is we have multiple cameras and we have some production value. And so it's a little bit more engaging. You actually see the instructor's entire body language, which I think is very important when it comes to teaching. And so I was just like, oh gosh, Zoom is terrible. Zoom can be utilized in a more engaging way, but you've got to have all that production equipment behind it and just use Zoom as the delivery rather than just using a webcam to be the main piece of equipment that you're delivering your message with. So so we never ended up instituting the membership. We did really well in COVID, like I said, and we gained a lot of customer base. I never really grew the company to a point where I've always been kind of like about growing the company to a point where I needed to hire people, which is probably not a good thing, but at the same time, I just don't want to have employees in California.
Yeah.
Like especially after all the regulations and rules that California was putting on people during COVID, during the lockdown, it just really opened up my eyes. Like I was like, gosh, this is, and I do pretty good on my own. And I actually started a side hustle during COVID that's doing really well right now. So I'm kind of happy about that. But yeah, I mean, we just kind of plug away,
Yeah. Well, California makes it, most business owners do not want to hire people in this state because it makes it so impossible to be profitable and hire people. Not only is the minimum wage super high, which, understandably people need to get paid, but the employee has all the rights to sue the employer, and there's so much liability and insurance and just, the laws about when you can fire someone. I mean, they get to retaliate in this state. So.
Yeah. And I think the thing that really tossed me really just kind of threw me for a loop was when I think it was AB 5 was being passed, which was like no contracting. Like you can't hire a contractor. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's the only way I would probably hire employees, because they would be working from home, right? I would give them tasks, but I don't need them to work 40 hours.
Yeah.
And I just kind of was like, dude, I don't think I really want to deal with navigating the laws of this AB 5 with this no contractor thing. I hire all my instructors on a contractor basis, but they only work for me for 4 hours, 8 hours, 32 hours.
Yeah, they made that. So that law was basically after, I think it was Dynamic's decision, where that company took their employees, W-2 employees, and converted them to contractors who were 1099s. And so the Supreme Court decided that that wasn't fair, and it was just a way of evading employer taxes. And so they made these rules over here where it was, you had to largely control the employee's schedule. If any of these things applied, then they were an employee, not a contractor. And so if you had major control of their schedule, major control of their what they were doing, and then there was one other thing, and I can't remember what it was, but it kind of made it so, the contractor would need to have their own client base outside, not you as their sole income provider. Right. So a lot of brand new contractors only have one client. So that would make them an employee in the eyes of the law.
Right.
And so it was a major incentive for businesses not to start in this state. And then, so it really hindered. In fact, like the IRS, the tax code is designed so that we will start businesses and so that we will invest in real estate. And the laws in California were really actually making that impossible.
Yeah. Well, I always just feel like the state is they're just against business to a certain degree, you know, or really what they do is they just take advantage of businesses to a point where they don't really see the harm that they're doing in some of the laws that they pass, you know, and they just take it for granted that they'll always be there. They're always producing income for the state. And
yeah, I don't know if the people who are passing the laws really have much experience as business owners. So when you don't, it's hard to pass a law that is going to be equitable for all parties.
Yeah.
If you're just trying to please your voter base and you're not taking into account, you know, where their income is coming from, which is all the small businesses, then you're not really looking at the big picture.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. You mentioned that you had another side hustle. I'm curious. I think we briefly talked about it, but I don't know.
So, so during COVID, it was interesting because there were a lot of people buying firearms. And I was putting together I've been into firearms my whole life. So I was putting together a rifle, and I was looking for a part. I was looking for a tool to help me put this thing together. And I noticed that there weren't very many options out there. And then I stumbled upon a guy who was making something similar to what I wanted. And he was making them down out of Vista. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey, I think you have a good thing going. I'd be interested in maybe working with you on getting a couple other versions of this made. And so when we hooked up, you know, I said, hey, I would be willing to start something up and sell these. You know, we can, rather than kind of doing he was showing them to gun shops, and he was kind of doing a word of mouth kind of thing locally around him. And I said, like, hey, let's try and make this a little bit bigger. Let's get the word out a little bit better than what you're currently doing. And so it's really just kind of a goofy thing. It's just a block of aluminum. And this part here goes into the magazine well of the rifle. And then you draw these bolts down, which pulls these nuts and expands each of these corners into the mag well. And then this block gets put into a vise, clamped into a vise, so that your work is secure and doesn't move. And it's overbuilt and guaranteed for life. And I've gotten some tremendous feedback on it from a lot of armors. We work at INSTRUQ. We teach, we help teach law enforcement armors. And so this is something that gets used quite a bit. And then what we did was we made the block, and then I gave it to a guy who's very well known on the East Coast, and he runs classes every weekend. And these guys come in and completely abuse the tools. And I said, hey, if this could survive your students, you know, provide feedback for me, right? So before we kind of launched the product, I met up with this guy in Utah at a training. And I said, his name is Chad. And I said, hey, Chad, I've got this product that we're working on, and I want you to put it through the paces in your class. I'm willing to give you enough for all of your tables, your workbenches. And as soon as he saw it, he knew it was a winner, right? And I was pretty excited when his eyes lit up when I showed it to him. And so about a month and a half or 2 months later, he said, hey, I made a video and I put it on YouTube talking about your block, right? We call it a lock and hold. And I freaked out, right? Because I didn't have a website. And I knew that this guy's kind of an influencer, right? And so I knew that as soon as he put the video out, people are going to be wanting to know, where do I get it? And so I remember just completely being like, oh my gosh, I don't have a website or any way to buy this thing. And we hadn't gotten that far. I was expecting to get some feedback from him before he made a video and put it out there to the public. So I remember the next day, I just sat down on my computer and I pounded out a website. I did it on one of the platforms, you know, where you can just kind of log in and start an account. And within a few minutes, you kind of have a website up and running. And it worked out pretty well. But I've just had a lot of issues with payment processing because of the banks kind of saying like, hey, we don't agree with your product because it's firearm related. So I was being canceled by a lot of payment processors, and that made it pretty difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went through five payment processors, and then.
This is so funny. I have to interrupt for a second, but this is something I also see with my cannabis clients. So not only is law enforcement getting cut out by the banks, but also anybody in the cannabis industry, because that's not legal in all states. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. Cannabis is that's actually poses a greater problem for law enforcement to a certain degree when the cannabis industry cannot do banking, because then they become all cash business. And then what ends up happening is they get robbed at gunpoint quite a bit.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a real risk to have that kind of element in your city. If you go to a call at a cannabis shop, then there could definitely be guns involved. But I couldn't sell this on Amazon. I couldn't sell this on Etsy. I couldn't, it's just been kind of like, gosh, I really just had to create my own website, and it's kind of been, it's been advertised through a lot of social media groups. I don't really pay for any advertising on it. It's all been word of mouth. I was out of stock. The guy that I had kind of partnered with, I bought him out, and he retired and sold all his equipment. He sold all his CNC machining equipment. So I was out of stock for maybe 6 or 7 months, and I was looking for a new machine shop that wasn't trying to get an arm and a leg to make these. And I finally found one, and they're local to me. So, they're maybe a 10-minute drive for me, which is awesome.
Oh, good.
But once I got them back into production, I put them back into stock, and I sold 100 of them in 10 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And are you doing your own fulfillment then?
I do it all myself. Yeah.
Wow.
I do it all myself. So, this year I invested in a laser engraver so we could put our logo on here. We used to put a sticker on here, like a really sticky asset tag. That worked fine, but I didn't like it. And so I bought a laser engraver so we could actually put a real dark mark on this. And then this gives me the opportunity too, because I've got a contract to fill with the Denmark military.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're buying I think they're buying 75 of these through another contractor in Denmark. So it's nice with the laser engraver. We can serialize them. We can put the national stock number on them. We can do anything we want, based on a customer's request. So we can put units on it. We can put, whatever they want, which makes it kind of a little bit more versatile.
Yeah.
That way. Yeah. But that's pretty good. I was making some decent money and thought, I got to spend a little bit in order to get some write-offs, right?
Absolutely. You mentioned that a lot of your instructors for INSTRUQ decided to retire. They were over the law enforcement during COVID. Was that to do with the protesting or was it all different reasons?
I think that the ones that were sort of at that tail end of their career was just like, if I'm going to be dealing with all this nonsense, and then be locked in my house when I'm not, right? Like, I think they were just kind of like, it's just time. I mean, it's amazing how many people retired during COVID.
Really?
Yeah, it was astonishing. Like, a lot of people retired. And I don't think I worked, so I'm on the what's called our SRT team for the department. And I think that our department had over 30 call outs during COVID for riots. I was in a number of those. So I didn't
What was
really.
that like?
It was crazy. I mean, it was it was the first time in the county's history that we deployed tear gas. And there was so much deployed, we ran out. So
Wow.
yeah, so pretty interesting. I mean, that just shows you the amount of people that were showing up, and it was crazy too because I think that our biggest call out was in Santa Ana in March of 2020, and it was insane. It was businesses being broken into, stuff being looted. We had a lot of rocks thrown at us, a lot of fireworks, a lot of those like mortar style fireworks being thrown at us. I think we were in gas masks for almost 3 hours. So it was a
Wow.
long event. Yeah, it was a long event. And there weren't that many arrests, I mean, because the political climate at the time, there was so many, there were a lot of people that could be potentially arrested, but our main mission was just to prevent destruction and damage and just to get people to go home really. And I think we did a really good job. I think we put up with a lot more than we typically would due to the political climate.
Right.
But we didn't suffer any injuries, and I think that we're so careful about our use of force now, and we receive so much training on use of force that I was very proud of our guys for, being restrained. They would restrain themselves, really. I mean, you get in
That's
that
hard to
situation. I
do,
mean, you get in
people.
that situation, and when you watch footage of other countries handling major riots, it really becomes a us against them type of thing. And we really do our best not to do that. We really do our best to, if it's not violent, we want to ensure everybody's right to their First Amendment, obviously, right? And it's just when businesses start getting smashed, fires are being lit, things are being thrown, is when we really start to try and disperse the crowd. Otherwise they're free to speak. But
Yeah, that's not the way the news portrays it though, right? We see all kinds of, I guess I'm going to call it propaganda, where we're seeing the police being portrayed as taking down innocent people who haven't done anything. But I think you and I have talked about this years ago of what you're actually running into when you're dealing with these kind of calls that you're going on.
yeah, it's interesting to there are actually quite a few crowd control devices that we just no longer use any longer because they're kind of classified as being indiscriminate, right? So we no longer use anything that may potentially injure, right, somebody that we didn't intend to injure. So all of our use of force is directed at individuals who are either causing a problem, like in terms of um, they basically got to be throwing stuff, right, or getting ready to light something, and they basically don't follow commands, right? So we give commands, hey, drop the water bottle, drop the rock. I mean, I had a trash can thrown on me that was on fire. It was just insane, right? Like, it's like, oh my
Wow.
God, what have we gotten ourselves, how have we gotten ourselves to this point,
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really surreal. It was really interesting. One of our deputies had a fairly large cinder block thrown at him, and it hit him in the leg. And I think that was basically our only injury. And I think we took care of him just due to the mechanism of injury, right? So other than that, yeah, it's pretty insane. It's pretty insane.
Yeah. Did you ever consider walking away during that?
No, I mean, I will say, like, your adrenaline is pumping. You're in this like totally surreal environment, where it's just the energy is so off the charts. It doesn't really bother me if somebody's yelling at me or calling me names or whatnot. I don't really care about that. I care about the guy next to me and the 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 guy from the other agency who's on the line with me, and my team, essentially, right? So it's very like team oriented, and it's really important for us to be trained up at a level where we work as a team. So part of that is when we look professional and we act professional, it just comes across a little bit more, I mean, frankly, a little bit more intimidating because we've got our shit together. You know what I'm saying? So we spend a lot of time training. I think that I've got 28 years in, and I've been kind of thinking like, I'm kind of over it. Maybe I'm a little over it. But then I think 2024 could be interesting.
Yeah.
So I might stay in and do a even 30 and see how that, 2024 goes, and then probably call it a day at that point. So I'm starting to get to a point now. I'm 51. So I'm starting to get to a point where if I'm on my feet for 10 or 12 hours the next day, I kind of jello,
Yeah.
So especially wearing all that gear. I mean, I add another 30 pounds of gear to us, and then you got the heat, and it gets to be quite a bit.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it also has got to be, you're talking about the energy being off the charts with the amount of confusion, because a lot of the people who are there have this idea that they know what they're there for, but they don't really have the real story, and they certainly only have one side of it. So it's amazing how extremely polarized you can get when you only have one side of a story, right? So something I always tell myself is, if I'm really charged up about something, it means I only have half the story. So you have this confusion. So you have these people after this goal, and there's a sense within all intelligent beings that I don't have all the information. I mean, it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And yet you're propelling all this energy toward fighting for this cause, and it'll really charge everything up a lot worse. I mean, have you seen that to be?
Yeah. Well, I think too that the politics at the time was sort of like, oh, well, we can kind of, we have something to kind of come together over. But really, I mean, if you really looked at the age range of the protesters at the time, they were all kids, right? To me, it felt like the ultimate flash mob would show up and build and build and build and build, right? And interestingly, a lot of the participants were never from the communities that were affected by these riots, right? They would come in, they'd use social media, they would come in. Oftentimes, a lot of the arrests we made, they were from Los Angeles. They were coming down to Orange County just to cause problems, or be involved, or whatever level.
Not willing to shit in their own neighborhood, right?
Yeah, well, they were still doing that up there too, right? But they were coming down. Yeah, I mean, LA was not immune to any of this, right?
Yeah.
But I would say if it stayed in LA, we would have seen far fewer call-outs, So, but the internet is an amazing thing, right? So you just, if you're monitoring the right channels and you see that there's 1,200 people gathering somewhere, it's like, let's go. What else are we doing? Like, we're on lockdown, right?
Right.
So let's just go and see what happens.
Yeah. So I wonder what the beliefs of those people were, if they were for the COVID lockdowns, or they were these protests more about against law enforcement or against the lockdowns, or was it both?
I think it was everything. It was George Floyd at the time was really a big, thing in the news, and people were debating, the merits of George Floyd's death, and law enforcement obviously was directly involved with that one.
Yeah.
And gosh, I can't remember the guy's name that was on trial for that recently. But and I'm trying to remember what the timing was. If he was on trial, I don't think he was on trial yet at that time. But I think BLM, the lockdowns, just the being angry at law enforcement for whatever reason. I mean, there's plenty of reasons to be angry at law enforcement based on where you're getting your information, But I think that law enforcement has done a lot, to curb some of that stuff over the last decade or two. I don't think 2020 was anything new. I don't think there was all of a sudden revelations that there were some bad apples in law enforcement. Yeah, it was. I think it was a lot of things. I think it was just like the boiling point, of the pot, was kind of had been simmering for a long time, and then when COVID hit, it just boiled over.
Yeah, at that time, I had been watching the news for the first time in years, and I even was like, "Whoa, what's going on?" This officer that killed George Floyd, and I got charged up about it, and I was like, what's going on with this police brutality? And I was actually meeting with some of my clients from Israel, and they were like, actually, if you look up the statistics, you'll find that crimes against African American people are actually not higher by police, by law enforcement, than they are white people or any other race. So I went home and I was like, what? And I started looking up all these statistics, and I found that to be true, that it wasn't actually disproportionately Black people that were being handled more brutally by law enforcement than any other race.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the information, it is interesting when you see people being interviewed about what they think they know about use of force or inappropriate use of force or use of force that leads to the death of somebody that's in custody. They think that it's like thousands of people of color, you know what I mean? And it's just not. It's compared to the amount of law enforcement contacts that exist. I think there's over 1 million contacts a year. There's so many factors involved. And I think that we've developed a lot of training to recognize mental health, drug use. It's become a very complex job. You got to have a lot of knowledge, and you're held to such a high standard, right? Like, if you weren't aware of a spectrum of autism, and then you were called out because somebody was acting, strange potentially, and then maybe you thought they were on drugs, but they were really autistic. These are some of the things that some law enforcement has run into. And then it turns into a use of force, maybe because the person's autism manifests in a way where they don't want anybody close to them, right? Or, as you're giving them commands to do something and they're not doing it and you raise your voice, then they become sensitive to the volume that you're projecting at them, and then they shut down and they don't want to listen. And and I think a lot of law enforcement thinks that, hey, that this person's just on something, right? And really, it's a mental health condition, and then that person ends up being taken down and hurt. And then the public gets angry because this autistic juvenile or young adult wasn't treated fairly, right? And I think that's really tough. But you can see the evolution of the training, trying to incorporate that side of the coin, because it's difficult, right? When you get called out, when a family calls you out because they have a young adult living with them that is acting erratic, it could be so many reasons, right? So you got to be able to kind of assess the situation in a way that is appropriate, you know, in the way you're dealing with it. You know, and you know, a lot of times mental health and drugs go hand in hand, right? Like it's a chicken
Right.
and egg. It's a chicken and egg, right? Are they?
Yeah.
Do they have mental health problems because the amount of drugs they've been taking throughout their life, or have they had mental health problems and they're self-medicating with, you know, illicit drugs? You know, and it's also been difficult. I will say this, like it's been difficult with the decriminalization of narcotics in our state here in California because you're not really arresting people. You're giving them a ticket once in a while, right? Like they never are being arrested at this point for simple possession of cocaine, methamphetamine, or heroin. I mean, you have to have a substantial amount in order to really be arrested and taken to jail for it. Otherwise, it's basically confiscated and you're issued a citation. You're given a court date, which people don't go to. And so because it's not really like a, you know, cops like to actually find crime, right? Justify their ability to arrest somebody based on the crime that person's committed and take them to jail. And that's kind of what we do. And so now that you just don't take anybody to jail for narcotics, we see the interest in training, you know, on narcotics has kind of fallen to the wayside, right? So it's just like, well, I just write them a ticket. So how much knowledge do I really need to, you know, you're not going to court on it, you know, very little. You're going to court for very little of this, right? So you don't have to be really up on, you know, methods and distribution and the way it's made and the way it's smuggled. And, you know what I'm saying? These are all things that an officer would potentially be asked on the stand. Like, well, how do you know, how did you know this was what it was? And, you know, well, based on my training and experience, I know that, you know, when this stuff comes over the border, it's packaged in this way, in this form. And we're just not, it's like if they find it, you just write a ticket.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that,
and then of course, you know, well, you see these, you know, people who use narcotics on a daily basis, they're not really like, oh gosh, let me put my court date on my calendar, you know what I'm saying? And make sure I have a ride to court, you know, in 2 months or whatever it is. It just, They never show up. So then their ticket ends up going to a warrant. So we have this massive backlog of warrants. I mean, tens of thousands of people have warrants this day and age. It's unbelievable. And we don't have the resources to go and knock on people's doors and ask them like, hey, you missed court, what's going on? You know? So it's a battle. Wow. Yeah, it's a battle.
So that's almost like tipping a little bit toward lawlessness because we're incentivizing narcotics users to come to this state because all they're getting is a ticket. And then it still becomes an arrestable offense because a warrant is issued, but there's nobody to enforce that. So, and diminishing the education.
Yeah, we import a lot of narcotics users. That's 100% correct. And we did that after Obama passed the universal health care. So like there was some things about the Universal Health Care Act that got passed that really incentivized rehabs to bring people in and milk them for all the insurance money they could. And there were actually like brokers that would bring people in from out of state. They'd be like, hey, you know, you have a drug problem? Come to Newport Beach. You know what I'm saying? Like there's an amazing rehab. I can get you a bed in an amazing rehab in Newport Beach, California. You know, like they kind of sell it as a rehab vacation, right?
Yeah.
And then the rehab was kicking back to these brokers. They were kicking back money to them for bringing them patients. And then the rehab would basically treat them for as long as the insurance was there. And then as soon as the insurance ran out, they were just thrown to the curb.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was really, the Orange County Register did an amazing article on that. And that was that was kind of like the beginning of our homeless problem. I feel like, I mean, it's not like we've never had a homeless issue, but it really started to increase
Mm,
when we started bringing addicts for treatment, using them for their insurance money, and then you're out.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they would literally they would wake up one day and they'd be like, "Hey, sorry, your treatment's over. Like your funds have run out." They'd put them in a van and go drop them off in a park.
Wow.
Yeah. So they would spend the money and bring them over comfortably, but then once their money ran out, you're just out of the facility.
Wow.
So,
That is just,
but
that's
yeah.
that's a side of,
But if you were a daily
healthcare
user,
that's not being looked at.
yeah. But if you were a daily user, what did you want to use? Somewhere where you didn't get in trouble for it.
Yeah, and where the weather's nice year
Weather's nice.
round, where you can, yeah,
Yeah.
live comfortably on the streets once you get thrown out of rehab, which is
Right.
supposed to help you. And I
Right.
mean, there's no continuity of care to help them get jobs or find housing, or
Mhm.
so many pieces are missing from that just state-sponsored healthcare. Okay, well, then now we need to consider continuity of care, housing, employment. All of that comes together.
Yeah. 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 It's a mess. It's a mess. I mean, the homeless problem is an addiction problem. So, but we treat it as, oh well, they're unsheltered.
Yeah,
So it's not just it's not just that they don't have a place to live. It's they don't have a place to live because they can't function as a normal human being. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Based on their addiction.
Do you have any idea how many of these people are veterans? Is that a majority or a minority or mix?
I'm not sure, but I know there's quite a bit. There's a number of them are veterans. But I think I mean, if you really pay attention to what was going on, I think that a lot of people were people who had that people who had 100% potential to being on their way to living, the so-called normal life, you know what I mean? Job and housing and family and whatnot. But they just got prescribed a heavy dosage of pain medication for whatever ailed them and just never got off it, I mean,
Yeah,
I think that's extremely tragic.
yeah,
They weren't really seeking a way to mask emotional pain, right? They literally had like pain management issues, and they were giving a prescription for a narcotic that they became addicted to, which turned into heroin use,
yeah,
and so their job essentially became, get heroin. That's their job.
yeah.
Get heroin to try not to, be sick.
Wow.
So, and then fentanyl. I mean, fentanyl came aboard, and every heroin user will never forget their first high, right? Like in the very beginning, how awesome it was, and then you start to just use to not get sick, and the high is never as good as it was in the beginning. But when fentanyl came aboard, you got that high again.
Mm,
It was like way better. And so fentanyl is insane. I mean, and now fentanyl is in like just about everything. So the scary thing is, if you have a teenager or a young adult, that just wants to maybe have a Xanax and buys one on the street, not thinking like, well, I would never do heroin. I would never try fentanyl. But the street Xanax that was pressed, illegally in a house somewhere is cut with fentanyl. And it's a dosage that nobody can control because it's dosed in micrograms. So you get that one pill, or you get that one pill in that batch that has too much fentanyl in it, it'll take you out. We're
yeah.
seeing that quite a bit. So, and these are the things, right? Like when fentanyl became like a big thing, like we sold a lot of training to try and get people to understand what it was that they were seeing out there on the street, and to understand what the risk was to law enforcement. And I think that in the beginning, the risk was kind of exaggerated a little bit, until we understood really like what, I mean, I can remember when fentanyl came out, I made sure that I was always in long sleeves, had gloves on. I mean, anytime that I was dealing with somebody suspected of narcotics use, if I was searching a car that was suspected, narcotics use, I had a mask, I had gloves, I had his long sleeve. I mean, I really put a lot of personal protection equipment on, and it's kind of calmed down a little bit since then. But I think a lot of people were really freaked out that if you touched fentanyl, you could potentially die. And it's not really the case anymore, but that's the way it was being presented as we were learning about it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but everything has fentanyl in it now. So you just have to, I mean, I think you have to be crazy to just buy drugs on the street, I take it.
yeah.
I mean, I don't trust anybody, let alone to make the drugs that I want to take, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's really scary raising kids, because when I was a teenager, I mean, not that it was safe to buy drugs on the street, but I did it, and
it was a lot safer.
Got away with it. It
Yeah.
was safer. And now I'm like, you can't even try to experiment. It's not a game.
Mm-mm. No, it's not a game at all. And gosh, I mean, it's to the point, like I joke with my friends, if we go somewhere and somebody's hosting and there's food out, like we were at a birthday party a few weeks ago and they had like, cookies and brownies and stuff. And I had to ask the homeowner, like, hey, like those are regular brownies, right? There's nothing in those brownies, right? Like, because I don't want to get pot raped, okay? Because I'm not like, I don't smoke marijuana, and I don't want to like just inadvertently eat a brownie and be like, oh my God, what's going on,
Yeah.
So yeah, I always have to ask, like, hey, these are like brownies that don't have marijuana in them, right? Or cooked with THC or yeah. So I always joke with them. I go, I don't want to get pot raped,
Yeah, it's good.
And then my wife jokes, oh, it'd probably do you some good, you're so uptight. I'm like, hey, if I'm gonna do marijuana, it's gonna be on my terms, not on somebody else's, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we're coming up on time. So INSTRUQ has a website. You have to be law enforcement to take those courses?
Yeah. So we service anybody that works for a law enforcement agency, whether it be local, state, federal, tribal. And you basically have to be working in an enforcement manner, right? So either sworn law enforcement or we definitely work with analysts, intel analysts, because they work side by side with law enforcement. Even though they didn't go through an academy, they're still background checked and they work hand in hand, solving cases. So we'll work with analysts. We'll work with dispatchers and whatnot. But yeah, you basically have to be in the law enforcement realm in order to get access. And we check everybody. We go through this kind of extensive vetting process in order to make sure that you are who you are, right? Because I don't want to train somebody on the other side of the law, right? So that they know our methods, right, our techniques. Even though I feel like we're always kind of playing catch up to what they're doing, we still do have some tricks up our sleeves that we don't want to give away. So we make sure that that the person that's registering for access is who they say they are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another random question. I just want your opinion on it. So I took my very first firearm training class like a year ago, and it was funny because I went through all of these emotions. It was a class just for women, and so like I found myself sitting in this gun range, and I'm a person who's like a non-violent person, right? I don't like conflict. I avoid conflict, and firearms scare me. So I'm sitting there and I realize I'm in a building full of people with loaded weapons. And I'm like, oh my God, I wanna leave. And I'm like, no, sit down and just get your shit together. And so then that happened like a couple different times during the class. And once the instructor started teaching, I was fine. But we had a couple women actually leave crying before we even got to the point where we were trying out the firearms.
Wow.
And then afterward, after we had practiced shooting, my sister and I left, and I was so like, I was vibrating with, and at the time I saw it as fear. And then I decided, okay, maybe, so at the time I was like, I'm not going back. I'm not doing another class. And, it's too loud. I can't handle the noise. And the instructor had told us how there was a guy who was actually he was law enforcement, and his daughter had snuck out, and he didn't turn on his flashlight when she came back in the window and ended up shooting her. So I, went into all these paranoid thoughts and fearful thoughts. And then later, after kind of doing some of my own examination of my mental health, and I realized that feeling, that fear, that vibration and the shaking, that is the same feeling of, it's essentially arousal. It's fear. It's the same thing happens to your body in fear, anger, excitement, nervousness. So it could be a positive emotion. It could be a negative emotion, if you want to label them that way. But either way, the physiological effect is the same. Mm-hmm. So I've decided I am going to go back for the next class. And
good.
I mean, really, it takes practice, right? It takes.
Yeah, it's familiarity, right? Like you've got to think too. You've been told most of your life that guns are dangerous, guns are bad, only bad people have guns, right? Like, and you don't realize that high schools used to have shooting teams, right? Back when our parents were going to school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. Like that was a normal thing. I mean,
wow.
Gosh, when I was in the 80s, growing up in the 80s in Boy Scouts, like we shot guns all the time. And that was like one of my favorite things to do when we went to summer camp was to go shoot 22s. I mean, they weren't like high power rifles or anything, but it was marksmanship. It was, shooting for accuracy. It was, understanding how to operate a firearm safely. I mean, I learned from such a young age. My dad was in law enforcement and we had firearms in the house and whatnot, but it's literally familiarity, understanding the system, understanding what it's capable of, understanding what input is needed in order to make it function. And honestly, you get to a point where, I mean, I've carried a gun for 20 years. I've always had a gun on me, right? So it becomes like no different than putting a wristwatch on. It's just a part of your everyday thing that you put it on and you just go about your business, and so long as you treat every firearm, you get all the safety rules, right? Treat every firearm like as if it's loaded. Don't point at anything you don't intend to destroy, and you follow all those safety rules, and you have familiarity, and you do your, once you go through your classes, and if you decide you're going to purchase a firearm, it's not something you just want to stick, well, now you want to stick it in a locked case. You have your little kids. So you definitely want to make sure that you're securing it so that they don't get to it. But you want to take that and go to the range and actually practice with it, right? And I think that you'll find, like, as you get better and more comfortable, you'll actually enjoy it. I know that indoor ranges can be a little over the top with the noise, the amount of noise.
Okay.
So I would suggest finding some place outside that you can shoot, because it won't be nearly as concussive, and there won't be like, it's so loud in an indoor range, it can be a little crazy, right? And it's hard to hear. And if you have the earmuffs on that amplify voice and you're getting instruction from somebody, but then people are shooting, So what's happening is the electronic ear protection is closing the mic, opening the mic, closing the mic, opening the mic.
Oh.
And so it's hard to hear people, right? Because you're only hearing a little bit of what they're saying. People are shooting around you, and yeah, it can be kind of daunting. And when I took my wife to an indoor range, she was like, ugh. But I think that if I had taken her to an outdoor range, it would have been way less stress, way less like, oh my gosh, what's going on? All these people around me are shooting.
Yeah, I could see that, because he was telling us to pull the trigger very slowly, to slow down.
Mhm.
And I was like, I can't. I have to be the first to pull the trigger, or I'm gonna jump and shoot, wherever.
Yeah, well, that's all comes with your instruction, right? So, your trigger pull is got to be smooth, and you got to not anticipate the bang. Because if you anticipate the bang, then what typically what you're going to do is you're going to dip that wrist, because you know that the gun's going to go up. So what you're typically going to do is you're going to be like, I know my gun's going to flip up, so I'm going to, with my wrist, try and anticipate it and counter that recoil, and so then you end up not hitting your target.
Interesting.
Right? Yeah. So you have to get used to pulling the trigger and not anticipating the shot. That's like the biggest. If you have a good grip and you're not anticipating your shot, then you can hit whatever you want. And with time, you'll understand that, and it'll become more enjoyable. And yeah.
I'm hoping that the people who, did their mad dash for their guns during COVID are practicing and didn't just get it and put it away.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I looked into opening a firearms range in California, and it was so expensive. It was crazy expensive. All the environmental impact studies and all of the, it was all of, nobody wants a firearm, nobody wants a range in their neighborhood because they feel like the bullets are going to fly into their house, or it's going to be noisy, or, it's difficult. If the amount of people that own guns in California went to a range on a weekly basis, there would not be enough to service them at all.
Wow.
So yeah, they're not practicing, although you can practice without a range and without ammunition. You can set up your firearm without any ammunition or a magazine in it, and you can practice pulling your trigger, right? It's called dry fire. You can aim at a point in the distance, and you can pull the trigger and watch to make sure your sights stay on that target that you set up. And
our neighbors were Marines, and they had some kind of blank things that they let me practice with in their backyard. They just had a board on their fence and that was cool. It wasn't loud. I wasn't scared of that.
Yeah, it can be intimidating, but like I said, it's like, what else is intimidating? Surfing like surfing on waves, right? Like that's pretty nuts. But I just say it's time in the water, right? Yeah. Every time you paddle out, you're better. You understand how it works. You understand how to navigate. You understand how to paddle. You understand how to duck the wave to get out to where they're forming. And pretty soon, after 15 or 20 trips, you're riding, So just time in the water. That's all it is. You'll get it. And I'm available if you have any questions or if you need any advice or,
Awesome.
Yeah. If shooting with all women becomes a problem, then I'll be happy to come. We'll take you out. We'll find some desert. I think you're out in the Palm Springs area, right?
Yeah.
There's actually some places out there that you can shoot outdoors that are pretty easy to find.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that.
Yeah, let me know.
All right. So good to see you. And we'll be talking with you soon.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Bye.